Empires that once ruled the world are gone: Assyria, Babylon, Rome. But one ancient people still exists and rebuilt a nation in the modern era. This is a narrative of an indigenous people claiming a sovereign state after 2 millennia of exile, set against a backdrop of continuous imperial intervention and regional resistance. From the earliest inscriptions of antiquity to the high-tech labs of the 21st century, the persistence of this national identity across changing regimes remains one of the most significant phenomena in world history. The story of the ancient kingdom begins in the Iron Age, a period of widespread upheaval. Following the collapse of the late Bronze Age city-states, while early Israelite society was once characterized by a decentralized tribal structure, the pressure of external threats, particularly from the Philistines, catalyzed a transition into a centralized monarchy. In the 10th century BCE, the kingdom was first consolidated under the House of David. Around 1000 BCE, King David established Jerusalem as the national capital, moving the center of political life to this strategic hill countryside. Under his reign, the Israelite tribes were united into a cohesive state that expanded its influence. David's son, King Solomon, oversaw a golden age of stability and economic prosperity. His most enduring legacy was the construction of the first temple in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, completed around 960 BCE. This magnificent structure served as the national and spiritual center of the people, centralizing worship and reinforcing identity. However, this unity was short-lived. Upon Solomon's death around 931 BCE, the northern tribes refused to accept his successor, leading to a permanent division of the kingdom. For the next centuries, two sister states coexisted: the Kingdom of Israel in the north, centered in Samaria, and the Kingdom of Judah in the south, centered in Jerusalem. While the north was more populous and economically robust, the south maintained the stability of the Davidic dynasty. For 4 continuous centuries, the era of independence was shattered by the rise of the great Mesopotamian powers. In the late 8th century BCE, the Neo-Assyrian Empire began its relentless westward expansion. Between 722 and 720 BCE, the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom of Israel and deported over 27,000 inhabitants into the interior of the empire. These exiles became known to history as the 10 Lost Tribes. The southern kingdom of Judah survived as a vassal state for another century, but it could not escape the march of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. In 586 BCE, King Nebuchadnezzar II breached the walls of Jerusalem. The first temple was destroyed, the city was razed, and the majority of the Judean population was carried off into the Babylonian exile. Yet, even in exile, the people's identity remained unbroken. Following the Persian conquest of Babylon, Cyrus the Great issued a proclamation in 538 BCE allowing the Judeans to return. They rebuilt their sanctuary, establishing the Second Temple and initiating a new era of national life that would last through Persian, Greek, and early Roman rule. The final catastrophic blow of antiquity came from Rome. In 70 CE, Roman forces under Titus destroyed Jerusalem and burned the Second Temple to the ground. Decades later, after the suppression of the Bar Kokhba revolt in 135 CE, the Romans renamed the province Syria Palestina and banned Jews from Jerusalem in a deliberate attempt to erase their connection to the land. Though the state was extinguished and the land was lost, the people's identity was preserved through a shift to Rabbinic Judaism, centering their lives on prayer, Torah study, and the enduring hope of a return. The nation lived on in its scriptures and collective memory, waiting for the modern era to find its way back to sovereignty. Following the catastrophic failure of the Bar Kokhba revolt in 135 CE, the Jewish people were transformed from a regional power into a dispersed and persecuted minority. Roman Emperor Hadrian renamed the province Syria Palestina and banned Jews from Jerusalem in a deliberate attempt to sever their association with the land. Yet, what followed was one of history's most resilient acts of cultural preservation, as the nation transitioned into a portable civilization. The first pillar of this survival was religion. The destruction of the Second Temple forced a radical shift from a sacrificial cult to rabbinic Judaism, centered on prayer and Torah study. The synagogue became the new community hub, and the codification of the Mishnah and the Talmud provided a unified legal and spiritual framework that functioned regardless of geography. This spiritual life was sustained by a second pillar, education. As early as 64 CE, a religious requirement was introduced for Jewish boys to learn to read from the age of 6. Over the centuries, this ingrained a culture of universal literacy, ensuring that even the most isolated communities remained connected through a shared sacred language. Supporting these intellectual pillars was a patriarchal family structure and a fierce sense of community. Traditions like the Sabbath and holiday observances created an inner rhythm of national life, preserving a distinct identity even when the external world was hostile. Finally, the diaspora communities themselves served as a global network, from the flourishing Talmudic academies in Babylonia, which lasted for 1,500 years, to the Golden Age in Spain. These communities maintained unbroken ties to one another and to the memory of their ancestral home. For 2 millennia, though they lived as minorities under various empires, they never ceased to pray toward Jerusalem, viewing their dispersion not as a finality, but as a long wait for the return to Zion. By the late 19th century, the landscape of Europe was being reshaped by ethnic nationalism. For the Jewish people, this era brought both a Jewish enlightenment and a terrifying surge of violent anti-Semitism, such as the Russian pogroms. In 1896, an Austro-Hungarian journalist named Theodor Herzl published The Jewish State, asserting that the only solution to anti-Semitism was the re-establishment of Jewish sovereignty. In 1897, he convened the First Zionist Congress in Basel, which formalized the goal of a home for the Jewish people in Palestine secured under public law. This sparked the First and Second Aliyahs, waves of migration to Ottoman-controlled Palestine. These early pioneers established agricultural colonies, and the first entirely Hebrew-speaking city, Tel Aviv. This monumental effort required significant resources, and the movement found a vital financial supporter in Edmund James de Rothschild, who funded many of the struggling new farming communities. By 1914, the Jewish population in the region had grown to approximately 60,000, setting the stage for a major geopolitical transformation. Following World War I, the region transitioned from Ottoman rule to the British Mandate for Palestine. Tensions escalated between growing Jewish immigration and Arab resistance throughout the 1920s and 30s. After the catastrophe of the Holocaust in Europe, which saw the annihilation of millions of Jews, the international community faced an urgent humanitarian crisis. In 1947, the United Nations adopted Resolution 181, a partition plan to divide the land into an Arab state and a Jewish state. While the Jewish leadership accepted the plan, it was rejected by the Arab Higher Committee and neighboring states, leading to the outbreak of a civil war. On May 14, 1948, as the British Mandate expired, David Ben-Gurion declared the establishment of the State of Israel. He invoked the natural right of the Jewish people to be masters of their own fate in their own sovereign state. War began immediately. The armies of Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq invaded the new state. The conflict that followed, known as the War of Independence, secured Israel's survival, but also resulted in a regional crisis and a massive displacement of populations that remains a defining issue today. Today, the state that emerged from the ruins of 1948 has become a global leader in technology and innovation, recognized as one of the most innovative nations in the world, driven by a surge of human capital and the culture of resilience. It remains a complex, pluralistic society gathered from over 100 countries. The journey from an Iron Age kingdom to a modern democracy was never a straight line. It was a path marked by destruction, to millennia of longing, and a relentless preservation of memory. It is the story of a people who reclaimed a sovereign state after 2,000 years of exile, set against a backdrop of continuous imperial change.